Okay, our final speaker of the morning is Jim Davis with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Jim has worked in vegetation and wildlife studies with the Division of Wildlife since 1973. He was assistant project leader for restoring big game range in Utah from 1977 to 91, and that's in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service Shrub Lab in Provo. He was a project leader for Utah Range Trend Studies from 1991 to 2009. Jim helped establish the Desirable Components Index during his time as assistant manager in changing wildlife populations to reflect more realistic habitat conditions. Jim is currently doing special projects with the Division of Wildlife's Habitat Section. He received his PhD in range ecology from Brigham Young University and has been adjunct faculty since 1994 at BYU, and he's been on numerous graduate committees during that time. So, thanks, Jim.
I'm dealing with perception, wildlife, rangelands. I'm saying it's more complex than we can probably understand. And he has some guidelines, and we're talking about how we as a division use the factual information about animals, habitat, fundamental basis of range management of big game. The quantity and quality information determines the accuracy of decisions regarding big game management. Basically, management decisions can be no better than the information upon which they are based. And that's the way we do it. Range inventory, I just want to give a little background, a little historic background, saying we started basically in 1958 doing what we call range inventories. And it just looked at the overall forage base, the quality it was, if it's being overused, production, management decisions were determined by the use of this. Inventory, we changed objectives. We wanted more permanent transects, and the way the data was gathered, it no longer was very say viable. You couldn't work, not with permanent transects. So we changed some methodology. So basically we have range inventory, and then in about 1982 is range trend. Methods were slightly modified. We kind of tweaked them to get a better sample size, designs, cover, species, things like that. Currently we look at trends, condition. We try to identify problems in critical habitat. We determine maybe where rehabilitation is needed or changes in management are required to help restore function and resilience in some of these critical ranges. We monitor habitat improvement projects like Alan mentioned. So we're trying to quantify cost, treatment effects through time, and things like that. We use a lot of information in interagency meetings. All kinds of information. You can read up on this later. But anyway, we measure about everything. Just put it that way. A lot of people are really kind of impressed when they go out with us on doing some range trend studies, seeing how much information we actually get. Had to have a few pictures of some animals, like everyone else here. Some of the critters use some of the habitat that we measure. And we have the Utah Watershed Initiative. Basically, we're looking at, I did a series of presentations with our past director. And with that information, we initially began a program to improve ecological function in sagebrush. We're losing in pinyon juniper communities. This involved Utah's Watershed Initiative. And then we had what we have here. It's a partnership-driven conservation effort, restore and manage ecosystem health and conservation, especially the focus areas. I'll show you a map in just a moment. Utah Partners for Conservation Development is kind of a coordinating committee, so to speak, to prioritize projects in each of the regions, so we do the most important projects first with the amount of money we have. And usually it'll be anywhere from $10 or more million a year in doing a lot of these projects. And the thing is, the committees are made up of from people from 15 different state and federal agencies. A lot of involvement. This, I just give you an idea of just distribution. We have, from my perspective, you can't see it, but anyway, range trend is located throughout the state. It's everywhere. And with the range trend, permanent transects, these are permanently located transects. And plus all we've done with regard to restoration, we probably have over 1,000 of these things located throughout the state. Here's the focus areas, and much of ours is in the range, which is the tan. If you'll notice, that kind of corresponds a lot with where the location of our transects are. We talked about the regions: northern region, central region, southern, southeast, and the northeast region. We do a 5-year cycle, like we did one this year. The following year we do this region, this region, this one, this one. So every 5 years we do a cycle through the state. We meet with the previous or past region, discuss the information we have summarized, or we're going to talk to the people about what information is important, or do we need to change emphasis, or do we need to suspend sites or get new sites for location of new areas that need to be studied. Assessment of trend is nice to have. And if you looked at any of our reports, you look at trend, but then you can have a stable trend, and it can be very, very poor condition. So, to kind of fix that, we get this, we call it Desirable Components Index. Through years of trial and error and everything else, and looking what was good and what was bad, we got some components we felt were the best way to describe what's happening in the winter range. What makes good winter range? Preferred browse. We have to have low decadency, 20% or less. 10% or more of the population is young. Got to have recruitment. Herbaceous understory. Got to have so much perennial grass cover, perennial forb cover, and you can tolerate maybe so much like cheatgrass, less than 5%. This gives you the idea: 60, 40, and obviously the points on different elevational types would be different. So preferred browse, we get 30 points. Decadence, percent young. You get so much for each of these components, and you get a total at the end. So with annual grass, you can go negative. The more you get, the worse the community gets. Noxious weeds. Desirable components. We have the low potential, low site potential, mid or middle, and we have the higher potential, which would be the mountain brush communities. And I'll show, here's an example of one. The points, the range for excellent, good, fair, poor, very poor. An example, Porphry Bench. The digital cameras of this, when this was taken in 1990, weren't very good, obviously. But anyway, you can look at this. It was as we call, stable. And then in 2004, if you'll notice, the individual plants look like they're dead. They are. Okay? We had a large die-off in 2002, 2003, which corresponds with a lot of the die-off you had in Aspen. Gives you an idea of the DCI. 62, good, trend, stable, stable. Here at 2004, now we've got at 3, very poor, down, down. Gives you an idea of what some of the numbers, how they changed. We went from browse cover 12% down to a little over 1%. Decadence went from like 28% to almost 95%. Decadence defined as 25% or more of the at least 25% of the crown of the plant is dead. To give an idea of the variation, how it changes from locale to locale. Northern region, this is the DCI regional trends. If you look at this right here and say, oh, they're all on the positive side, we're okay. At low, mid, and high elevations. So I'd look at this one, and probably what I will have you look at the northeast, Look how as you go lower, you get more change, more negative change. Same with the southeast. So now we're looking at the northern region. Remember how everything was on the positive? You look out here and out here, look at this. Box Elder County. Low, 20% down. Mid, 6%. This trends all over through the state in your sagebrush type, mountain grass type. The lower the elevation, the more it's been affected by drought through time. Your southeast region, I'll just show you one of the herd units. Look how much we had change here low. Look at this. Big die-off. This Porphry Bench is located in that area. If you look down here, Elk Ridge area and that one here, you can see how it goes right along with the elevation. High, medium, lower elevation is the most affected. Here's the northeast region. Same thing. Here you didn't have too much of a negative effect in the mid to high elevation. Low elevation, very, very much affected. This is a series of, as we look at it, it's called rotation, 5-year rotation. Okay? And now we're going to look at another 5-year. Rather than look at everything, just look at 2 areas. We have you look down this area here, down near Kanab area, and this right here is the Elk Ridge area. And look at the change. We're going to go from there 5 years later, 5 years later, showing how everything's going, especially lower elevation stuff, just going down. We're down to a lot of the areas are in poor condition. Issues, I won't go into much detail. Disturbance, continuous spring grazing in some of our low elevation sagebrush, especially Wyoming sagebrush. We lose the herbaceous components, the cool season, weedy annuals, specifically cheatgrass is the most. Competitive exclusion. With sagebrush understory, you get little or no reproduction, no young, nothing. Depressed annual growth, low vigor, and you'll notice through time they'll just die off. Increased fire, drought. Won't even get into pinyon juniper woodlands. That's another couple of hours of discussion. This is just a general trend. I could show it in any of the regions of the state. I'm just looking at density. And you're looking at Wyoming sagebrush, lower elevation, Vassiana, and then black sage. And through time, you can see we had numbers like nearly 5,000 to 6,000 plants per acre. And now, as you can see, on average, we're way, 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 way down. Decadence, especially for Wyoming, which is lower elevation. We used to think that sagebrush at 20% decadence was okay. You know, it's just typical. You can see we're way beyond that. Percent young, recruitment's almost, we had to have at least 10% recruitment to maintain a population. But that's confounded with cheatgrass. You have cheatgrass, you're going to have more than 10. Here's just an example of one area. Like I said, I could show you this through all the whole state. South slope in the Uinta Basin. I'm showing you 3 readings. There we go. Percent decadence in the mountain, which is higher elevation. You go from 15, 25, 28. Marginal. Decadence in Wyoming, 22, 46 in last cycle, 62% decadence. Percent dying, that's when you have 50% or more of the crown dead. It will not recover from that. So, 9, 15, 21, now it's 21%, dying, 44%. Population change. In this area, you lost a third of your population in 10 years. Perennial grasses, here's the difference between elevation. Your mountain, Wyoming. Mountain, Wyoming. It's drought related, elevation too. Here's an area where it was said that the problem here is too many wildlife. It's taking out the sagebrush. Okay? So we went on field trips in 1988 and 1992. In 88, We had special hunts, lowered the population to the point where there was no hunting for 4 years, and ever since then it's been limited entry only. Like 40 permits or so. That's it. So here we go. Now we're going to go through this little cycle. 86, 92. You can start picking up, looking at some of the sagebrush. This is Wyoming sagebrush. 1999. There you go. It's all gone. And here's some of the numbers, but it's the same trends. You're looking at decadence, percent young was down to 0. Population went from a little over 2,000 down to 0. Ruined Park. I guess the biggest thing here is stipe now is quite high. Quadrant frequency is almost the same though, so it never really disappeared. It's just the way it was grazed. Livestock are on it from November 1st to June 1st. The numbers of livestock through all that time when we were taking out the deer population was never changed. It stayed the same because it said they weren't utilizing it. But in 92, they said, well, we did a fecal analysis and found out that the cows were 80% or more of their diet was sagebrush. But you use sagebrush more than 50% each year, especially with drought, and you're going to take it out. It's going to die. An interesting little thing I was looking at. Of course, you get stuff on the internet, not very good quality. The thing I want is, the numbers start from 1950. This is the Palmer Drought Index. Notice the value has never been this low. This happens to be 2002, right there. And that's when we had all that die-off in the sagebrush communities from Wyoming to Pasadena to right on up through Aspen. We had a lot of die-off there too. Here's how close it was for some of them to survive. I'm down in this draw. I have not changed. I'm looking at northwest aspect. You're looking at about probably less than 20% of the plants here died. This is after 2002. So I just looked over here, and now I'm looking at southwest aspect, and more than 80% of the plants died here. Show you how close it was, drought-wise, of making it. Just a little bit, the aspect change. So what happens if you don't have any grazing on these plants? Okay? This is no man's mesa, and no man for a good reason. You can hardly hike after that thing. Anyway, on the edge, where you got thinner soils, you basically have all the plants dying. Toward the center, we have more soil, deeper soils, and you have larger sagebrush. You have Wyoming and Basin. You have about half the population died. Another one, here's a little trend right here. Lower elevation pinyon, especially south and west aspects, have been dying off. Here's one, you can sit and watch this one. Here you're looking at one sample date, 5 years later. Whoops, hit the wrong button. Starting to change, and actually it's dead now, 10 years later. Northern Arizona, we had a die-off. Coincidentally, 2002, but we won't get into that. But this is elevation again. The elevations, 68 to 9,300 feet, they divided it into low, medium, high elevations. Here's what 90% died below elevation, 61% mid, 16% at the high elevation. It's drought related. We got involved in a lot of studies throughout the state. And what happened was we had a series of areas where people said, you have to go and check and see the elk are getting too much forage. You can see this is mule's ears. This is iris, wild iris. Here it is again, another site on the LaSalle's. Here's Elk Ridge. You're looking at our clipping. Mount DUTTON clipping. We got all over the state, from the northern part of the state to the southern part down to Elk Ridge. DUTTON exposure. This didn't turn out very good. I couldn't find the original, so I had to make a copy. But here we go. Inside the exposure, it's been there a long, long, long time. There's a few exposures, but they haven't been there long enough. Here is proportion of forbs to grasses inside. Litter. This is rock. pavement, cryptograms, bare ground. Look outside. Look at the difference in how your ratios. Mostly all forbs, a lot of them increaser forbs, and a little bit of grass. See the big difference between inside and outside. We did clipping studies. Elk were drawn to smaller areas, especially areas dominated by forbs. They prefer forbs in the spring and early summer. Production varied from very low to quite high, drought related. Most of these areas had 60 to 70% forbs in the spring and early summer. And that's what the elk were drawn there for. They liked the forbs. Depending on the area and site, use of elk average varied from about 10 to 20%, depending on how drouthy it was. And also the livestock use was usually exceeded 60% in all these clipping studies we did for over 10 years. Here's DUTTON, right next to where we do the clipping. And what happens here is they did a burn, 1,000 acres, first year 150,000 3 feet high, later 6 feet high. They plan on to, even with the high numbers of ungulates and there in the area, they still got a very good response from their treatment. This was an area that was heavily used. They said heavily used by elk. We went in and did the studies. It was not. Actually, it was what I call drought pruning. You're getting almost less than 2 or maybe 1 centimeter growth a year. So appearance looked like it was being hedged heavily, but it wasn't. It just wasn't growing. Bookcliff Initiative, we started out there. We had about 18 transects. We had almost 60 at the end of it. And it was said there was early spring grazing, wildlife speak with the elk in the area. I thought, eating too much, okay? Elk. Now I'm just going to show you a series what the sites look like from the bottom of the valleys, on top of ridges, down the valley bottoms, old chainings that burned. Get right down to here with the elk, clip plots, everything. Data demonstrated deer and elk were not affecting the trend, therefore the division could continue management currently directed by the management plan for the area. This is just an area just to see what happens when we do some of our treatments. It gets degraded like that, 25%, 20%. It is cabled, not seeded, and this treatment's been like this for about 50 years. We want to improve ecological function. And can't go into much detail because my time is done. I have to get we had a true mountain mahogany. I call it an outlier. It was 2,000 feet out of its elevational realm, basically. Looked very poor, small population, was hit pretty heavy. An agency said, well, we want to manage wildlife with regard to this outlier, and we went and did the studies, and that showed that it's just one way out of place. It shouldn't even be there, basically. It was about 2,000 feet above its normal. Anyway, get an idea of how sometimes we look at some small little populations and trying to run the whole landscape over just a few plants. I had some stuff here I got from Shul Goodrich. So I'm assuming you can look at these later. I don't have time to go into them. But he has a series of hundreds of these plots where he has almost paired plots where you have a treatment where you get suckering and its areas going to maturity, and over here you got decadency. Series of them. I haven't got time to go. Here's the drought one that was killed by drought in 2002. And you see the sprouts. Try to get through it anyway. Not as much detail. You can look at the talk later and see some of those later slides. But got to finish so you can get a few questions if you have any.
Plenty of time for questions.
That was a whirlwind tour of about 35 years of stuff. So, yes?
I'm just wondering if you had any areas where you either did scrap-burn sagebrush or had been burned and then excluded livestock. I worked on a project that got a lot of regeneration on sagebrush.
Depends on if it's associated with cheatgrass. Oh, She's talking about regeneration of sagebrush that had burned, and there's no livestock on it, like, and they got regeneration. What elevation was that?
6,000. Yeah, 6,000.
So it's mountain big sagebrush?
Sorry?
Mountain sagebrush?
Yeah,
Okay.
on the lower there was some Wyoming, but we definitely...
Right, you get it on that ecotone. Right.
And again with aspect and
Right.
cheatgrass.
I have some pictures. I didn't, like I said, didn't show them here, but we have areas where actually we've shown through a series of 15 and 20 years where sagebrush population has just died off because there's no recruitment. The sagebrush is, the understory is totally cheatgrass. So there's no reproduction and the old plants just died. And the other scenario was if it burned, we said, okay, now we'll watch and see what comes back. Well, after 20 years, it's still just 2 inches of annuals. That's it.
Yeah, you have to have it.
That's it. And like you say, you don't get rid of cheatgrass. You just outcompete it. Because if you look at some of the stuff, which I didn't have time to put on here, but we have a series of lot of treatments and burns and things like that. And when we have a good competitive understory of perennial species, quadrat frequency for cheatgrass is always going to be high, 80-90%. But the cover goes from 25-30% down to about 1%. And that's a really, really big difference. And if you hold them at that for 2 or 3, 4, 5 years, then that seed bank's totally depleted, and then it's a whole different story after that when it burns. So, yeah.
Yeah, Jim, being from Wyoming, I think maybe you might be wrong on percent decadence of Wyoming. Wyoming's about 50% decadent, not 66%.
Okay.
You meant Wyoming Herbaceous, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I'm kind of slow. I was just assuming you meant Wyoming sagebrush.
It's called watershed restoration. Do you do any measurement of effects, of your restoration projects on water? So have you picked up any monitoring in terms of influence of springs, more beaver,
Okay.
that sort of thing?
That is more of a, like Perry Plummer, if anyone's familiar with Perry Plummer, years ago studied a lot of these things on rehab. He mentioned a point on Indian Peaks where they did a lot of large pinyon juniper projects. And what happened there was they got springs they never knew they had after they'd been in for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Another thing is a study done by Mark Farmer. We looked at the effect chaining did to runoff and an interception of moisture on a site. And within 1 year, we're getting 8 times more soil loss, 5 times more water runoff on the control versus where we had done the chaining. It had only been in a year. So it was an immensely enhanced system. We had storms, you get a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch in just an hour or something like that. And it's moving rocks big as Volkswagens down these draws. And you look at our sites and they're small ones. 40, 50 acres, 30 acres. Nothing even moved. You can look on there and the litter was left in place. And you go down these draws in the control areas where there's no understory, just juniper. And you're moving the landscape. So, yes.
I'm from Wyoming too. That is a decadent 50%. This is the they're maybe young. How effective do you think your agency is in convincing the public on a scale of 1 to 10 that habitat conditions may actually be what's driving populations in some areas versus outright mismanagement by your agency and predators?
Well, it probably depends on your perspective, obviously.
Well, what's your best? Are you effective in convincing that plants are not sexy?
Anyone who comes to where our meetings and that are and where we give this information, I think they are convinced. I think they say, okay, I can see where you're coming from. But if they haven't come and haven't seen what information we have, you can go on our website, look at our range strength reports for 30 some odd years and look at all that stuff, and it's all written up right there. Pictures, the whole thing. You look at the series of pictures and everything. So if you wanted to, you could look at it and read about it. And we have those reports too on with regard to rehab treatments and monitoring those. We usually monitor those, first 3 years right after we do it, and then after that every 5 years, and just to see what's happening and see what's kind of the best methodology with regard to elevation, vegetative type, and what's really the problem.
So one more question in the back, and then a couple of announcements.
Yeah, I'll return to that question about when you put in the study on the return
Okay.
So one other question is, you just look at perennial grass for continue whether does it get ranked differently if it's native perennial versus exotic, say, Negro or Crescent?
No, we don't rank it any differently than it's a perennial. Oh, she's talking about do we rank them differently if it's a native or if it's a perennial. I will say this. A lot of people in the past have said, hey, native species will compete and keep cheatgrass in tow, more or less, keep it down. Sorry, it doesn't work. I didn't show the site, but I can show you a lot of them. We had 30-35% stipe kamada cover, and the cover for cheatgrass was 30% at the same time. And all the sagebrush has died. And back to your question with regard to repairing. Willows. The only time that I've done those in early spring. We did a series of these for the BLM. They have a lot of these series of things, especially in the southeast. And we went and read those for them. And that's mostly what we do. And that's the only ones we do with regard to range trend.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim.